we thought we'd take a look at something that will already be underway once we get back, and that is the census. The concept of the census is very simple. At the start of each decade, the government does a comprehensive count of every single person residing in the United States. Not just citizens, not just voters, every single person. Because only by knowing how many people live where can communities effectively plan to provide things like roads, schools, and emergency services. And it's usually conducted through mail-in forms, sometimes supplemented by in-person interviews. And however hard counting every single person seems, it's actually much harder. Because some groups can be particularly tricky to count, including children, those living in remote areas, homeless people. So to accomplish all of this, the government opens 250 regional offices, hires around 500,000 temporary workers, and mails notifications to over 140 million households. Conducting the census is the largest and most complicated peacetime operation that the government undertakes. And the 2020 census is likely to be even more challenging than usual for reasons ranging from budget shortfalls to active Republican meddling. So tonight, let's talk about it. And let's start with what questions are actually on the census, because a lot of people don't know what they are. The census asks you just a few basic questions: your name, age, sex, race or ethnicity, how many people live in your home, and how they're related to one another, and whether you rent or own. That is essentially it. And it is critically important that people participate in a census. For a start, census data is used to evenly distribute political power across the states. Seats in the House of Representatives are divided up based on population. And after every census, adjustments are made. For example, after the last one, Texas gained 4 seats and Ohio lost 2. And some states are anxious about being undercounted, as this story from Minnesota shows.
The 8th congressional seat that we have, we've held on to it for some time. We barely held on to it in 2010, and in 2020 it looks like we're in the same situation again, where we're very close to losing that seat.
And census data also plays a crucial role in directing government funding. Hundreds of federal programs use census data to distribute well over $880 billion to states and localities. And if your community's population count is off, even by just a tiny percentage, it can have real consequences. Take the city of Circle Pines, Minnesota. In the last census, they were just 82 people shy of the 5,000 person threshold required to qualify for certain state roads funds. And local officials were very frustrated because they believed that they'd had an undercount. And we haven't even gotten into the fact that businesses also use census data to decide where to add jobs or open stores. So it is absolutely vital to get the census right. That is why it's so unfortunate that the president seems to think it's a complete waste of time and money.
They're spending $15 billion or some ridiculous amount of money on a census. I don't know why we can't do that through the computers of the world, because frankly, that's the way you can do a census today, and probably a lot more accurately.
All right. So obviously there is a lot to unpack there, but let me just quickly pick up on that whole cost issue. Congress has actually underfunded the Bureau by hundreds of millions of dollars for years, during which time critical preparations for this census needed to be made, and that is not good. Because next year, for the first time ever, the Bureau will be asking most people to answer the census online, which could make counting everyone easier, provided the government's website works properly. You do not want another healthcare.gov on your hands, a website whose launch was so flawed that you may well recall only 6 people were able to use it to sign up for health insurance on its first day. To avoid problems, typically the Bureau does multiple full-scale test runs in different locations to make sure that everything is not only working, but that it will work in a variety of difficult-to-count areas. It had planned to do 3 test runs this time, in an urban setting, a rural setting, and on tribal lands. But thanks to budget constraints, it ended up only doing 1 in Providence County, Rhode Island, where they didn't even have a marketing budget. One library actually tried to help there by offering people coupons for $5 off late fees if they filled in a census on a tablet computer there. But the results were underwhelming.
How long has this been up about in the library?
A couple of weeks, I guess.
And how many people have come through to use it?
Unfortunately, well, here's the thing. A lot of people have looked at it. You know, so far we've had 1 that I can vouch for. 1 person's come in and done it. And, you know, and the coupon was an incentive on that.
So the 2020 census was always going to be a big challenge, but instead of being able to focus their undivided attention on all these issues, the Bureau has had to expend time and energy dealing with this shit.
Overnight, the Trump administration announced a move that could impact the balance of power for years to come. The 2020 census will ask about citizenship for the first time in decades. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross announcing the decision following a request by the Justice Department.
That's right. You may remember that last year, Wilbur Ross, who is in charge of the census, he announced a citizenship question would be added to the census in a move that even the Bureau's chief scientist said would harm the quality of the census count, which makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you have the government, specifically this government, asking people if they are citizens, many may choose not to respond out of fear that the information could be used against them or people in their household. Despite the fact, and this is really important to know, it is against the law for the Bureau to disclose any private information that identifies an individual to anyone, not the IRS, not ICE, not anyone. Personal census information is actually kept completely confidential for 72 years. At the time, Wilbur Ross claimed it was actually the Justice Department who had requested that citizenship question to better enforce the Voting Rights Act, which immediately seemed like bullshit because voting rights has never seemed exactly like a top priority for this administration. And sure enough, it later emerged that it was Wilbur Ross who had actually pressured the DOJ to request the question from him. Now, the reason why involves this guy, a Republican redistricting strategist named Thomas Hofeller. Here he is delivering a very funny joke, very well.
Redistricting is like an election in reverse. It's a great event. Usually the voters get to pick the politicians. In redistricting, the politicians get to pick the voters.
As it happens, that man died last year, and amazingly, his death ended up exposing Wilbur Ross's true reasons for asking the citizenship question, because when Hofeller's estranged daughter began to go through his things, she found something very surprising.
His daughter finds these zip drives, and on the zip drive is this tranche of information that essentially shows that he had engineered this as a plan explicitly to suppress minority votes.
It's true. His daughter found documents on the hard drive that essentially laid out Republican strategies to suppress minorities' voting power and to use the Voting Rights Act as a cover. Hofeller had proposed the citizenship question so he could make it easier for Republicans to hold on to power. And it turns out he and the Trump administration were in close contact about the whole thing. And the scheme was so impossible to justify, 3 courts ruled against it, and finally, the administration lost in front of the Supreme Court, and the question was dropped. Meaning, the citizenship question will not be on the census next year. That is really important to understand. It will not be on the census. Here's the problem, though. Here's the problem. Those who work with immigrant communities say the damage might unfortunately already be done.
The anxiety and fear among Chicago's Latino families remains despite President Trump's decision to back off on the citizenship question on the 2020 census.
The reluctancy is there because the environment has been already created to deter them.
There is a lot working against this census, and experts are worried an undercount next year is inevitable. The only question is by how much, and the fear is it could be millions. So, what can we do? Well, it's actually relatively simple. All of us living in America right now need to fill out the census next year.